we're teaching so many other classes for things that people aren't using. But if we would teach like the basics of communication and listening and curiosity in, starting in first grade or fourth grade, then how does that not impact how everyone communicates with each other moving forward for the rest of their lives? Like, is this not being discussed anywhere? I mean, it's crazy.
I think it is. I mean, if you look at a bunch of 5-year-olds, they tend to be a curious lot.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I'm thinking about my grandchildren. I have grandchildren. Actually, my oldest grandchild's about to turn 10 this week, and the youngest is 2. And spread out over 3 different families, we have 6 grandchildren. And delightful, I have to say. I'm a grandfather crowing about my grandchildren, or as we would say in Yiddish, kvelling. I'm kvelling about my grandchildren. But in any case, that phenomenon, it's not so much teaching communication. What you said about curiosity, if we foster curiosity, the communication stuff's going to more or less take care of itself. Where you run into, I mentioned there's some exceptions, where you run into situations where you actually need to teach communication skills, basically 2. One of them is if somebody is somewhere on the autistic spectrum. Because with folks on the autistic spectrum, often one of the things that makes them be on the spectrum or that defines them as on the spectrum is like what we used to call Asperger's before they changed the diagnostic categories. Folks who have a difficulty sensing whether the person they're talking to is pissed off or happy or sad or whatever. If they're not good at that stuff, they need to actually learn some communication skills so that they're not inadvertently communicating something that's going to get them in trouble. So that's communication. And then the other one's even simpler. I have worked with couples that literally do not speak the same language. Right. They got together, they were really attracted, but, of course, if they're talking with me, at least one of them speaks English. The other one may speak very limited English, and the other one may not speak their language very well. And they have a communication issue, and that you learn that by getting better at the language.
Oh, I'm dealing with that dating in Barcelona. Like I've been out on plenty of dates with people who seem very nice, very smart, but I realized quite quickly that there is such a communication barrier that half of the relationship is going to end up being like lost in translation. Yeah. Or I've even had people that their grasp of discussing in English things are pretty good, but they think their grasp of English is way better than it is.
Yeah, yeah, that can come up. Yeah.
So there's always like big communication misunderstandings, and so I've definitely realized that like I certainly need someone that speaks enough English to make it like not a simple barrier to what do you want to eat tonight.
Or if you could get your Spanish to the point where you'd be like really idiomatic in Spanish, and of course even then there are the cultural things to be bridged, which are always interesting. And some of that causes communication issues too. Different assumptions about what something means. A nice example of that one is interrupting. The concept of interrupting. In some cultures, interrupting is extremely impolite.
Yeah.
And in other cultures, and Deborah Tannen, does that name ring a bell? She wrote a book, probably 30 years ago. I think it's called You Just Don't Understand. Women and Men in Communication, but she's since done a lot of other work like cross cultures and things like that. And one of the things she points out is in some cultures, it isn't seen as impolite, it's seen as supportive overlapping.
Right.
And if you get people in, I'm remembering somebody told me about a meeting they were in. This was a Jewish friend of mine, Ashkenazic Jewish. And I don't know if you know any of the stereotypes of Ashkenazic Jews, but
Not really.
Everybody interrupts everybody all the time. And if you didn't, somebody would think, what's wrong with you? And, it's kind of classic. And so this friend of mine was at a meeting in New England where she had just moved, and she was on a committee of some town thing in the town of New England where she lived. And she started noticing every time she started talking, everybody would stop and look at her like as if she had just done something wrong. Well, she realized she's coming in on the end of what they were saying, which is a normal thing to do among Ashkenazic Jews and among lots of people in New York City, for example, whether they're Jewish or not, because that's how everybody talks there,
Yeah, I can admit even the context of like friendships or business meetings or whatever, there's different cultures for if you can interrupt or not. I mean, I can only relate I had a partner once who was a chronic interrupter, and it was brutal, and no amount of communication saying like, can I get a thought out? Like, like, it didn't matter. It went on forever until we split up. Like, even, and it was such a bad experience. I like, now I really look for that now when
Yeah.
I'm going out with someone. Like, can I finish a full thought if it's 10 seconds long or a minute long before someone is just going to jump in, because it's really tough. But, you know, if culturally that's where you come from, someone else might be like, oh, this is just how we do it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And actually, then, well, I would speculate about this in your relationship. You can tell me if this is true or not. But a lot of times it isn't so much the interrupting per se as the idea that you're being steered in a different direction than you wanted to go. And
Yeah, actually, thinking back, it was like, someone trying to complete my sentence, and 95% of the time the sentence was wrong.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's made me think, like, okay, maybe this is not a good fit, because like, we're never on the same page. So
Yeah.
that's another topic in general. But
Yeah.
I wanted to switch gears to get into the betrayal part, because
Sure.
yeah, it was so fascinating to hear the those other answers.
Actually, I want to add one thing, if I may, because
Sure.
I said I wanted to explain that snarky subtitle of that same book. It's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. That's pretty
Okay.
snarky. Let's face it. The whole
It's
title
clickbait.
is
It's
pretty
clickbait.
snarky.
All right.
I'm sorry. Say again.
It's clickbait, they call it.
Yes, it
So
is.
it's
It is utterly. I admit it is clickbait. Totally.
it's bookstore clickbait.
Yes. Having said that, I point out, and this is a spoiler alert for people who want to get that book. I point out in one of the latter chapters that applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong also. Which is to say, I'm not claiming I have no good ideas. Why am I writing books if I don't think I have good ideas? Of course, I think I have good ideas. What I'm claiming is it's not so much the ideas, it's the ideology. In other words, if I start thinking I know, I'm not listening anymore. I'm defending.
Amazing.
And that happens in relationships, and it happens in therapy. If I as the therapist start thinking I know what's up with this couple, see, that's why I say I'm reluctant to even predict how they're going to do. If I start thinking I know better than they do, I'm going to be useless to them, because I'll be defending my ideas instead of actually open to hearing what's going on. I like to think I'm contributing some good ideas, but of course it's their life. They're the ones who are experts on their own lives. So I need to be open to thinking, no, I really don't know. And that's true much more generally. It's true in the domain of politics, for crying out loud. Everybody's got good ideas. And then when they harden into ideologies, they become a caricature of the good ideas. They turn horrible.
Sure.
And so what I'm saying is, no, we need to traffic in ideas, not ideologies. Because ideas open you up, ideologies shut you down. So that's where that snarky subtitle came.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I like that, that little separation of ideas as well.